Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Lunch and Learn. Hopefully you brought snackies. I'm going to be going over what different AST or application security tests are at a really high level. So this is not specific to our roadmap or anything. So basically the AST market, as defined by Gartner and most other people, includes services that you're going to use to test your code for security vulnerabilities. And that usually includes a mixture of SAST, DAST, fuzzing, IAST, SCA, and mobile analysis. And you can kind of see what those all stand for here. If you look at this list, you'll notice that we have everything except for IAST and MAST. You could argue we kind of cover MAST. I won't be going over them in this presentation because we don't have them as part of our AST, but if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the doc and we can answer them at the end. So who exactly supports AST here? And that would be the secure and defend teams, where secure is trying to make sure that this security testing is occurring earlier on in the process, so that parallels the fact that most people are trying to move their quality testing earlier in the process. And then we're also trying to, with defend, make sure that the ops people are getting much more visibility into the attacks that are happening. And any PM for any section upcoming who wants to butt in on their slide, just butt in. No anything needed. So the reason why we think we're going to be good at this is because we've got the whole process going already. And if you think about it as I describe where each one of these usually comes into play, we got you when you're coding, we got you when you're running your review app, we've got you when you're deploying to code, out to prod, and then we also have awareness of what's in your production environment. So we've kind of in a position to protect you before you're deploying, while you're developing, while you're configuring your environment, and then after you're in your environment to kind of watch that environment, react to it, and maybe not only temporarily protect you, but recommend, like, how do I get this fixed long term? And that's really what, independent of GitLab itself, application security testing is about. Is, in my opinion, it's a sister product to quality, because both are trying to say, how do I get the product to be performant, do what we want it to do, and not do what it's not supposed to do. So the first one on the list is SAST. And unfortunately, this one kind of gets the nickname spell checker a lot, which kind of rankles some of us here. Other people have just learned to just roll with it. But what it's doing is it is looking at your source code and looking for mistakes in that code that are kind of easy to identify by patterns. So in that aspect, it's similar to a spell checker in that you can build it in earlier in your web IDE and everything. But it really is not a spell checker. It can find something like a SQL injection, which, again, as we talked about, similar to quality, people put in O'Hare when you're quality checking a website to make sure you can handle Unicode and single quotes and double quotes and everything. And SAST is going to say, well, are you just taking straight up data into this function? That's not recommended. You should be handling it better. The risks here is for every different type of code that you're using, you kind of have to have, at least in this day and age, a different tool to look at that, because languages are different. So secret detection, it is what it says on the label. You're looking for, are you accidentally leaking secrets that you shouldn't be? So this could be an API token. This could be, a deployment variable, that's used to encrypt your database in a various environment. And those things ideally should not be just deployed out into the open. So you're trying to protect them from making it out to people who shouldn't be seeing them. Then you've got DAST, which a lot of people, I think, get confused about DAST outside of the people who work within DAST is, okay, well, that's kind of like SAST, right? Not not really. SAST is looking at your code. DAST is looking at deployed code. And that's really the major difference is like here we've got the review apps. So it's looking at a review app. And that's really important because some things that are not evident when your code's just sitting there happen because you have deployed and leveraged code. And that could happen because there's a configuration choice that you made. It could be because you put these particular two functions together and they pass them in a certain way between them, and that causes the flaw. So it's going to find some of the same things, but many more different things. The other thing with DAST is it's going to be much more language agnostic because it's just looking for, can I have running code? So I don't have to worry about looking at it for each different type of coding standard. And I think the frustrating part of this for some developers is like, it's going to tell you on this website, I found this problem. But as you all know, when you're writing a website page, it could be using tons of different functions located all over your code base. So you might be like, okay, well, which one of that caused it? Which I'll just quickly allude to IAST. IAST is supposed to help with that problem. We don't have IAST here, but it's supposed to kind of make it so that you can better identify where things are coming from. So it's kind of what people consider like the next generation or the step up. All right, and then you've got dependency scanning. And this is because I'm sure you all know, today, you don't reinvent the wheel, or really it's not ideal to reinvent the wheel constantly. So you'll find this particular library, this particular resource has already solved this problem for me. So I'm going to bring it into my project. Many projects today are more than 50% third-party code. Well, when you're relying on a whole different team of people, they're going to introduce vulnerabilities just like you're potentially going to introduce vulnerabilities. And those get disclosed through usually public methods, which would be like a CVE number, or it could just be disclosed to their own mailing list. In both of those cases, people should usually know like, hey, there's a patch version for this, or hey, you need to upgrade to the next version. And so that's where people are looking for, is this particular version of this dependency, which I'm relying on for this code, have a vulnerability? Some scanners, not ours, actually check to see that you're using the impacted function, which makes them a little bit fancier. Ours currently is just looking for, is the whole version that you're looking at got the risks in there? All right, and then we've got container scanning. Right now, it's awesome to deploy things out to containers. You can just pop things on, send them out agnostically to your Amazons or your Googles, and it manages your clusters for you. You don't have to worry about your hardware. The risk with that is you're not maintaining that operating system, you're not maintaining that server anymore, and you're reliant on an image, which usually has a particular operating system, certain dependencies that have to come pre-installed for your software to work. So what container scanning is doing, and in our particular case, we're doing pre-deploy scanning, not post-deploy scanning. That would be more of like a defend thing to look at a deployed container. But and you can kind of think of it like dependencies, are the pieces that are within this container that make up this image have known vulnerabilities or known issues. And if they do, then it's like, hey, you should maybe update to a newer image or update this particular piece of this image because that's going to be a risk once it's deployed. And the last one is we have license compliance. You'll notice that was not included. So when they talk about AST, it does not include license compliance. License compliance more relates to what licenses are you using, and you will probably hear the term SBOM, S-B-O-M, Software Bill of Materials, when people are talking about this. So for the acronym soup, I'm just tossing that one in there. If you hear SBOM, license compliance, if you hear AST, that's going to be those other things from earlier. And the new and exciting thing that we have is fuzzing. So I consider fuzzing not to be the first thing that you should deploy in your environment because it's going to find a lot of things. But definitely once you've got like your SAST or DAST, introduce fuzzing. And what fuzzing does is it's looking for, when I'm sending things, how is the application responding? And what I mean by that is there something that we've done that allows for a memory leak? Is there some kind of business logic flaw? Is there unexpected occurrences? And kind of like I was saying earlier, this pairs with QA. It's not just about, can I have an app that works? It's, can I have an app that works that doesn't respond poorly to unexpected or malformed content or unexpected formats of content? Does somebody try and put an emoji in a form, and does my form suddenly explode when I do that? That's not a good thing, and you need to know about that. And the nice thing is fuzzing, much like DAST, is agnostic about, like, you know, I don't have to say I'm using Python plus some Go plus some JavaScript. You just kind of say, like, here are my API points, and I want to validate these types of commands with those.
Nicole, to add on to that, another way that I've found helpful when explaining fuzzing is that fuzz testing is a way that you can find unknown types of vulnerabilities in your apps, whereas a lot of the other scanners like SAST and DAST are looking for specific things. In contrast, fuzzing is exercising the program in all sorts of strange and odd ways. So it's going to find bugs that traditional QA processes won't, just because it's trying things that your testers or your scanners didn't think to look for. Another point to add on to there, because I think on the slide it said this was done in production primarily. You can actually do fuzzing on parts of the application earlier in the life cycle. So if your app is using multiple libraries, you might fuzz one of those libraries that the app would use even before the full application is done being built and assembled.
And then I guess just for super clarity for the recording, you can fuzz various bits of things. You can fuzz the API, you can fuzz the website, anything that takes input, you can fuzz.
Exactly.
All right, so like I said, this was super high level, so I'm gonna go flip to the questions doc. I have no idea how to do this. Oh goodness. I am not on my normal hardware. If any, I can't minimize this. Is there questions in the document? Can anyone let me know?
In the document? And I'm curious of your thoughts, Nicole, and then, you know, Taylor, since you're on here as well. But like, what are some of the common misconceptions you've seen when people talk about our categories in AST? You know, are there certain ones that commonly lead to confusion on what the scanner does? And like example I'll use is I've heard people when talking to our customers talk about our SAST as if it's a DAST offering. So they've said things like, oh, well, with our SAST, you can find the SQL injections in your app while it's running. It's like, well, that's not really the case. You know, SAST is by definition static. So I don't know if the three of you have examples like that we can help clarify in this recording. So that way other people, when they see it, they can learn those common pitfalls and how to avoid them.
Yeah, I think we should definitely rotate through. I will echo that. I think when I give presentations, there's definitely a lot of confusion about what is DAST versus what is SAST and at which juncture do they run? Because a lot of people are like, oh, can I run DAST while I'm coding? It's like you could have a test environment, you could have like a pre-prod environment, a staging environment, but you have to have something for it. And it's like, oh, you know, like the SAST, that's going to catch, you know, something in my configuration. It's like, not really, because your configuration tends to occur either in the way in which you've deployed or in your running environment. That's not something you're going to catch because somebody set bit to true for a particular variable. Like that's a little too advanced for a SAST engine. I think also just people have no idea what fuzzing is. Absolutely no idea whenever I give a presentation, but something that they relate to. And you could in theory do it as part of DAST. So DAST is extensible and you can give it different payloads, but they're not specifically designed to try all of the options. It's meant to try what are the common options. Whereas fuzzing is, I'm going to try a huge breadth and depth of too long fields, different character type fields, different code type fields. And so people don't exactly grasp the difference in there, but you're looking for a different type of response. And that type of response is unexpected things that a quality person is not necessarily going to have considered of, I should test this field. Like if I'm quality, I'm going to say I'm going to try a number in a letter field or vice versa, not I'm going to try and put in 700 characters in this field and see what happens.
Yeah, I think it would be good for Sam to elaborate on this, but like one of the main things that Sam's going to be focused on with fuzzing is, coverage guided fuzzing, which can be done earlier. You don't need the review app. And I think like from the interviews we've done so far, analyst briefings, that everybody assumes that we're tacking on fuzzing to the end. So it's kind of like where the security team has the final build that's going to go public, and that's not really the case. Like you could actually start fuzzing before the application actually runs, leveraging our coverage guided fuzzing.
So that was me. I think all the PMs should pitch on that one. That's just the stuff when I've given presentations. And that, by the way, those slide decks with the cute animals are from presentations I've given at conferences. I'm recycling. So Sam and then Taylor, and do we have anybody else hiding? Go in that order.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of the points Nicole raised. Certainly for me, I especially hear the what is fuzzing question quite often. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of education and just the market and the security space in general, because a lot of what people remember as fuzzing is very antiquated from pre-2010 or even in the 90s. Some of these concepts were invented. And so kind of to David's point, a more general sense of shifting security left and using security as part of the developer workflow is where I see a lot of misconceptions. Security is not something that we at GitLab think should be bolted on at the end where security is testing the build before it goes to production. It really should be for all of these scanners something the developers are doing. They should be running SAST as part of their builds. They should be running DAST on their applications. We will be getting them to the point where they can run fuzzing as part of their development process as well. Because certainly identifying and fixing bugs during development is going to be cheaper in nearly every single case where something is found, and it's going to prevent those production systems from being exploited. So those are kind of the high points of some of the misconceptions I see.
So moving to me, I think this is one where is the product manager for SAST. I actually don't have to explain SAST to anyone. It never comes up. People just natively seem to understand SAST. I think this is where people give it too much credit and think it's smarter or does things that it doesn't do. So I actually explain what is DAST more than anything, because people think that DAST is SAST. And I think that kind of sets up this logical fallacy where people think that SAST is a magical solution. And so why does it have all of these false positives? And so you kind of set yourself up to be let down because your expectations were too high for something that effectively is a simple pattern matcher. And depending on how you write code, that pattern matches lots of things.
Yeah, I found a lot of value the other day in SAST, Taylor. I was writing a Google Doc and I went up and there's a spell checker option. And sure enough, like it removed all my typos. So our SAST product is amazing.
Actually, David, since you brought up the spell checker, that's a common thing that we get asked about. And the main difference that other AppSec vendors have that we don't is that it's a plugin into other IDEs. And so if you're using Visual Studio or something, other vendors can tell you that you're typing something that is a potential vulnerability. I think that it gets annoying for the developers, and it's often referred to as SAST Lite because it's not a full SAST scan, so it's only going to detect a small subset of things. So really, if you're a salesperson watching this, the better argument would be we have a variety of scanners that are done in the development within the developer's workflow.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, because that came up on our briefing yesterday, and even though I will say it was about fuzzing, but that question was asked, I the response that works really well, and kind of as what Cindy just said, is like, yes, that's on our roadmap. The intent is to be able to provide real time SAST results. I know Taylor is looking at ways to do that today. However, our SAST scans run phenomenally quickly. Like that can't be stressed enough. It's scanning the delta code change and it completes really quickly. And when people have been looking at the spell checker as a solution and some of our competitors' products, it's because their scans take hours to run. And so the developers want to have to wait. One of our customers said it takes 6 hours for the scanner to run every time they ask it to run. And I will point, they also said they only have like 2 licenses. So the developers have to rotate who gets to run the scan. Whereas our stuff runs in pipeline, and if you're making commits regularly, like good development best practices are, you're gonna be getting results really quickly and be able to address them while you haven't switched contexts. So I make the joke about the spell checker because Nicole brought it up, but it's one of those where I can see where we would want to go with it, but in the short term, that can't be stressed enough how fast our scans run and how you actually get that value really quickly. You don't have to wait forever
But
for something to run.
even in the long term, as pointed out, if it's there, it's still only going to be a small subset, and you can't rely on that. It's not complete, it's not comprehensive, it's a small subset, it's just an early indicator. So even if you have that, everyone on your team may want to use a different IDE, and we may not have plugins in the future for everything. And I'm pretty sure they keep popping up. There's more IDEs all the time, so you said go for game. But also don't, like, if you pass that, that's not saying you're perfect. That was a subset of checks that could be done while you were typing. So even if we have it in the future, please, everyone, or if you have it today and you're watching this, don't 100% rely on that. That is a piece of the puzzle. And hopefully you saw by them saying application security testing and seeing that there was multiple components, there is no one silver bullet. Everyone always wants the one silver bullet. You really need to put all of these pieces into play so that you're looking at different parts of the application from different angles to have the best chance of catching all of the vulnerabilities.
Nicole, it might be worth pointing out too that even though we don't have IAST, our DAST somewhat fulfills the objective of why IAST was created. So IAST was a means of doing dynamic scanning earlier in the life cycle to make it more interactive for the developer. Guess what? We do that. We do it with a review app. So we just approach it differently to solve the same sort of problem. What we don't do is instrument the app, which actually is, people don't like their apps to be instrumented because there's lots of different instrumentations. And so just might be worth pointing out that our approach to solve that challenge is a little different.
And if anybody else on the call wants to pipe up with questions you get asked a lot or misconceptions you see a lot in Slack, feel free.
The term fuzzing is a little ambiguous to me. Is there like a different way to describe it with like a different word that means the same thing that would be descriptive of this to engineers, or is this just something I've missed?
Yeah,
like
it's a great question. I would love to discuss if there are things that are less ambiguous. We refer to it as either fuzzing or fuzz testing. I think that's actually the closest we'll be able to get in terms of describing what we're trying to describe here. I think it's just going to be a thing of this needs to become a more common topic of conversation so that that term becomes more well known to people. Because fuzzing is not incredibly widely used right now, it's a new term for a lot of people, but I see us in the future getting it to the point where people know it just as much as they know SAST and DAST and container scanning.
So if we could help by writing blogs or just educating people on what this is this something that we need to encourage the community to use, or is this something that a certain segment of the community already knows about and wants?
So a lot of, and I might be overstating it, but a lot of security people, when they go through certain trainings, absolutely learn about fuzzing. But the one thing that I'm kind of excited about is, can I curse on YouTube? I will bleep myself. It sucks to set up fuzzing currently today in most cases. Really, really sucks to set it up. And so there are a lot of SAST tools that are easier to set up. There are a lot of DAST tools to set up. And because fuzzing is usually and I don't want to like downplay it, but it's usually a additional set of findings that are being found. You're like, well, I'm already finding findings A and B, and there's a ton of those, so I'm going to keep putting off fuzzing, which when it's painful, you know, everybody likes to delay that pain. But since we're going to be building it in, we're going to eliminate that barrier to entry. And so I think that will help people see the value of it. It's no longer, you know, like I'm finding some findings here, I'm finding some findings here, and I'm finding some findings here, and I have to correlate them. All of our tools find them and put them in the dashboard for you together, put them in the MR for you together. So it's not going to be like, I need to set this up. And so in one aspect, people don't actually have to understand that this result came from fuzzing. You know, they just need to know this was a vulnerability that was found. And so I definitely think we could blog and educate people. But on the other hand, in the end, you as a developer, do you care if it came from SAST, DAST, or fuzzing? Or do you care that, hey, this piece of code that I wrote has this particular risk associated?
Yeah, I think like from my own experience, I think I've actually used fuzzing tools without realizing it was a fuzzing tool. Like the two that come to mind was WP Scan and Nikto. Like I've used these tools, but I don't know if they're like, if that constitutes as fuzzing. In those cases, I was looking for unpatched WordPress plugins and for vulnerabilities on a web server by just attacking, you know, what was available. I think those are forms of fuzzing. Those are manual steps that I had to take. And so maybe I've already fuzzed my own things without realizing it was fuzzing. And that's the bridge. So if we were to like take known tools and say, these are examples of fuzzing tools that you don't have to go set up yourself.
Yeah, I think so both of those tools are DAST tools, and there are tools in the DAST space that will do lightweight fuzzing. I think that's the challenge here, Mo, is more like a fuzzing product is doing way more than what Nikto or WP Scan is going to do. It doesn't make those other tools not good, right? Because those tools are going to do things that the fuzzing tool is not going to do, like try SQL injections and also request forgeries and all that kind of thing. So I think the real challenge that Sam's going to have as he moves forward with, you know, the recent acquisitions and integrating them in is making sure people understand the value across each of the tools. Because I'll echo what Nicole said. I think in a lot of our customers' cases, they're not saying I need a SAST tool, I need a DAST tool. They're saying I need to know what my vulnerabilities are. And to them, it's good that they know we have the different tools, but as long as the tools are providing quality output and working as we expect, I don't know if they care that the finding came from one versus the other. But you're highlighting on a key problem. There are a lot of the web vulnerability scanners in the DAST space that will also occasionally just throw in garbage to see what happens. That's a lightweight fuzz, but that's not to the extreme of like what a REST API based fuzzer is going to do, or what the protocol fuzzer that we just acquired also does.
Which, one thing I think is really important in terms of go-to-market and our messaging around fuzzing is we need to not just talk about the tool, because the tool, I mean, to Nicole's point, is kind of a nice to have, right? It's one of the, like the last bastion. After you've done SAST and you've done DAST, then you might look at fuzzing. You're probably not going to start with fuzzing if you don't have the others, right? And so if I'm already finding 10,000 vulnerabilities with SAST and DAST, I don't want to find anymore. I've got all I can deal with, right? So in some cases, if you just look at it as an additional layer of scanning to find additional vulnerabilities, it's kind of a nice to have, but not a necessity. If though you position it for the gaps that it can fill, like API testing, then it's a must have as opposed to a nice to have, because I don't have anything else that does a good job of scanning my APIs. And so I think we have to be real careful to
once it's easy to set up, it's no longer, in my opinion, a nice to have. If you want to have comprehensive security coverage, you have to turn on all of the different ways of looking for vulnerabilities once it's easy, which is our goal. And then from there, we need to help with prioritization. So maybe you can say, I'm going to ignore everything that's not a critical and just not look at those and concentrate on wherever it came from. Here's my criticals, here's my highs, or here is the critical part of my app. But yeah, it's, if you want to have comprehensive coverage, you got to come at it from all the angles.
But it's harder to justify an incremental budget for comprehensive testing, because a lot of people feel like I'm already finding a bunch of vulnerabilities. That's got to be good enough. And that's why, so when you look at the, they're going after budget to get to ultimate, and that's a big jump. It really has to be a necessity and with a clear, compelling purpose. And I think something like APIs is really important there.
Well, and I think to add on to that and re-say what I said earlier, the difference between fuzzing and a lot of these other tools is that fuzzing is going to find logic flaws and unknown types of vulnerabilities specific to your application. Given API calls will always have SQL injection if you just use input directly. That's just a fact, and every SAST scanner will find it. A fuzzer is going to find the logic where your developer on a given calendar day with a given input configuration, there's a subtle bug. And that's really the thing that fuzzing is going to find, and we can emphasize, rather than how it's being done, the value the results are going to bring to your org. And I think that's a really good point to highlight if you do get those questions about, well, I already have SAST and DAST results, why would I want yet another scanner?
Conversely, you can also look at the cost. Sometimes that small one-off flaw can be so damaging. An entire industry of system administrators lose a week of their life. Please see Heartbleed, which was found via fuzzing and would not have been found otherwise. And the delay in that being found led to it being pervasive everywhere, which led to many system administrators and companies spending a lot of money and a lot of time to mitigate the results of that. And so if fuzzing is more available and is in more things, then, that edge case, which maybe only occur in certain aspects, but may actually be very, very, very bad, is going to get found. So that's also another way of looking at it.
Yeah, the reason I used that calendar analogy was because a few months ago, there was a brokerage application that went down because they didn't handle leap years correctly. That's not at all, well, it could be a security issue, but it's not really a security issue in this instance. It's just a subtle logic flaw where their traditional QA processes missed it. I would posit that fuzz testing would have found that if they had used it against the various parts of the app that were responsible for it.
Yeah, crypto and time and NTP and synchronization, those are all important things. I want to ask a question from the perspective of that OpenSSL or just like an open source developer. So if I'm building a project that's like a command line interface versus an HTTP API versus like a CMS web product, would you provide me different guidance on like where I should probably start in terms of like providing some level of vulnerability analysis? Or like, I don't want to be that OpenSSL developer who's, committing code on New Year's Eve, 1990, whatever, to then have, led to what was effectively Heartbleed. So would you provide me guidance based on the type of project that I'm doing, and where would I find that guidance?
So I'm not sure if type of project is the right thing, but I would look at any one of the threat modeling and risk modeling standards where you're looking at where is the important data stored. So look at GitLab, we classify our data by color. so anything touching the riskiest data gets the most scrutiny. So for an example, if it's command line, any command that I can run that's going to be destruction or, like that, you're going to want to concentrate on. So depending which tool you're looking at, depending on your interface, in a website that, allows you to place orders, you're going to put the most scrutiny on, like, how can I see people's credit card information, or how does the money exchange happen? Because that's where damage happens. Then after that, you're going to look at how do I protect PII, because that's going to get me fines. And so it's all about where is your danger, where is your risk. That's where I'm going to concentrate. So destructive actions, leaking of data, credit card numbers. And so you just pick those commands or that API call or that web page, and you start with that as your focus. And then once you figure out that's my focus, the best tool for that
I think that
is
Mo,
X.
Can everybody hear Nicole? Is it just me who lost her?
I could hear her. Yeah, she just
I can hear her.
muted there.
Looks like it's me.
I think like what I'm asking is like, how does GitLab help me? Like, why should I use GitLab as opposed to hosting my open source project elsewhere? Like, what can GitLab do to help me figure out the best things to start with? Because we talked about like, okay, maybe I'd start with dependency scanning, and then the next layer is this, the next layer is this, but it might be different based on if it's an API. If I'm building an API, then maybe I do care more about scanning it. But how do I know, like, what's the right starting point for me as a project owner coming to GitLab? And do I have to go search the internet and learn this myself, or does GitLab help me with that?
Yeah, so to your question, like, I think and this is where we could probably do a good job on either the direction page or even in a blog, just so it's somewhere online. Like your example is like, I'm writing something as a CLI. It doesn't have a web interface. What should I be doing? And I would say like the static analysis solutions that we offer would be where you'd want to start, right? So you could begin using SAST, which obviously is we have a language support for it. It's going to give you good value. You could begin with the coverage guided fuzzing, because that also doesn't require a public interface to interact with it. I think once you get to a point where you have a running service or some sort of interface, if it's the command line, off the top of my head, I can't point you to one specific thing, because like the next thing would be like a DAST type solution. But I do see a path to where we could potentially fuzz a CLI interface in a review app, right? So your app comes up and we could begin to interact with it there locally. If you do have some sort of service that's running, that's where you can begin to leverage DAST. So whether it's a API, a web app, like that's where you start getting into that area. So DAST API, the API fuzzing. Mm-hmm. And outside of that, and actually I should have said at that stack analysis point, you could be using container scanning, you could be using dependency scanning, right? So there's a lot of things you could be doing, but like as soon as you have one line of code, you can begin running SAST. And so I gave the example to a friend who was doing database development, but their app wasn't up and running yet. And I said, like, look, like right there, you wrote a SQL statement. You could have SAST tell you whether or not that was written securely.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm looking for, is that page or that blog post to tell me like, here's probably the things you could utilize for this project archetype. And
yeah, I'll take that as an action item though, that one of us will create something and make it either as a blog or I can put it on the direction page. But I see like a heat map type like picture.
Yeah.
Where are you in your development lifecycle and where you can now begin using security shifted left to you.
Right.
And
we have all the pieces. You just have to figure out,
with his fancy, editing software, make us a picture. But
one thing I would like to add on to that, because when I first started at GitLab, this is one of the things that made me most excited. Our auto DevOps processes have all of our security scanning built into them from day one. If you're a project maintainer with either an open source or proprietary project, you don't have to learn GitLab CI, you don't have to learn our security. Auto DevOps will do all of that for you right out of the box. And I think that's one of the really compelling things that we have versus a lot of the other solutions out there in the market, is to David's point about doing static scanning. You don't need to set up your Kubernetes to host your apps, to review applications. Auto DevOps gives you SAST, container scanning, all the other things. Then as you figure out your application matures, you understand how to host with GitLab, all of the DAST and the other more advanced security scans, those come automatically as well. So that's another big thing that I really think makes us different than a lot of other solutions out there.
So we can actually help you graduate in terms of your security posture from just enough for now to the next level to the next level.
Yeah, I think that,
Exactly.
like, I can't remember if I said this during one of the group conversations recently. So I feel like I've said this loud enough, but maybe I just said it to myself. But we're in a very unique position, to Sam's point, to be a true security partner. You know, whereas like the companies I've worked for previously, as well as other parts of the team who came from other security companies, you were kind of like, you would say that, but you didn't have that unique relationship that you can have with GitLab. And so, like as Sam said, like if you're using Auto DevOps, this first commit you have, it's going to be like, oh look, there's code, I can run a SAST scan, right? And you're going to have somebody who's truly there from the first line you write to the app running in production and wanting to know, is it safe, is it secure? And that's very powerful for us to have today.
I think it's an educational tool, yeah, for someone who doesn't know what these acronyms are, just to enable Auto DevOps and see that they exist. And then that leads to pages on GitLab's doc to understand more about what that is. Because if I'm a developer in a non-technical domain, let's say finance or healthcare, you know, these are things that may not be known to me. And so having GitLab guide me towards these practices and improving our software helps. So I love that. We have
Actually dovetails perfectly to the next question, which
sorry.
is, well, no, like I'm stealing it because it's a great segue.
Okay.
So the question is, how much are people actually looking for a specific type of scanning? And like you had mentioned, like healthcare or other things. Like if I'm in fintech or if I'm in healthcare, I may have a QSA or an auditor or a compliance person come in and say, you must have SAST, you must have DAST. Or they could just say you have to have AST. They could use whatever acronym they have been trained or told by someone. And so that may be part of their purchasing decision. So I think that we get a wide variety. There's some people who are like, I need security in general. And then there's other people who, because they have been told a certain terminology, say, I must have this thing because my QSA or whomever said I have to have this in order to follow best practices or standards within my particular industry. And so I think those people who are saying, I just want X, are an opportunity for all of us to kind of educate them of like, yeah, we can totally give you X, but that's one way of looking at your code. And you really should implement all of them so that you're protecting yourself throughout your entire process and you're looking at the code from all the different angles. And yes, we have that, but because of our pricing model, like you get all of the different security tools within Ultimate and you can use all of those. So there's no reason for you not to. Whereas with some other tools, it's by scan or, you know, whatever. And so you'll get penalized by lines of code or types of scans. And we're just like, you have paid for Ultimate for your developers. And so please use it and get better coverage. So that's on us to kind of educate them if they have been told to come in and ask for a particular thing. And some people may be asking to that point, or at least what I've seen, that they want this because they have their preferred vendor for other solutions that they're happy with. And that's why we have the technology partners, because they're happy with whomever they have for container scanning. And they're like, but that provider doesn't provide me with DAST and I really want DAST. And then we could be like, well, you know, you've got your container scanning, but we can give you DAST and dependency scanning. How about that?
I think another good point there too is a lot of other products and solutions out there in the market, they're going to upcharge for additional security scans, which makes it kind of a friction point between orgs want to do more security scanning, but that means they need more budget to do an additional type of scan or do it more places inside their organization. With GitLab, because we're providing all of our scanners in the same license tier in Ultimate, that makes it a non-issue, a non-friction point of, we really do want to help you be be that security partner for our customers and encourage that best security practice without having to put a choice to our users of, do you want better security or do you want to deal with budget and resourcing issues? And that lets them grow into those best practices over time rather than have to, continually figure out, is each individual new scanner something they want to spend more money on?
I remember pitching to a team, like wanting to set up cruise control. This was like the first continuous integration server that I had ever worked with. And at that time, CI was like, what? Why would you want to spend time integrating your code? And now today, CI is so normal. How could you not want CI in your software engineering development practices? And so I kind of think like we're at the cusp of that with some of these security tools as well, but it's not normalized in regular developer culture because there is like a paywall to get access to some of these things. Are some of these things going to end up back in core so that we can try to create, like normalize these practices as part of regular open source development culture? So it's not, because for me, I didn't really truly
Taylor
understand
should start with that one, and
Okay.
Sam should follow on for that one.
Yeah, so when you look at all of our SAST scanners, they're all open source tools. Anyone can literally go download them, run them in their environment. So we get this argument a lot of, well, I could go do that, so why would I pay for an ultimate license to do it? True, you can go do that and have fun going and spinning up 18 scanners and getting them to run and deciding when to run them and the cost associated with running them. Or you could just have them integrated. So we do have an issue to move down our open source scanners to core. That is actively in flight. However, that doesn't include the full suite of ultimate features. So basically, core customers will soon be able to trigger the scanner, configure the scanner, and see the JSON object that the scanner creates. They won't get the nice security UI. They won't get the MR widget, the security pipeline, the security dashboards, all the things that make it easy to interact with those security vulnerabilities, and then to do things like see dashboards and the status and roll-ups and all of that kind of thing around security vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I mean, it's a great question because certainly if security feels like a paywall, folks won't use it. All of our features in Defend initially came out as part of core. So the WAF that we released in the fall of last year, that was released into core from day one. Just like all the great stuff Taylor was talking about, we're going to add new value on top of that. That'll be part of Ultimate to give those target customers, target users the value they need from Ultimate. But we have a lot of the stuff in Defend as part of the core offering today already.
Yeah, by the way, like everything now technically in Defend is in core because like vulnerability management moved over to Secure, which is an Ultimate. But
I guess, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, container network security, its base offering is in core. Container host security is getting ready to ship. That's going to be in core on its first release. And as Sam mentioned, WAF is there already. The thing I was surprised Sam didn't mention is that some of the fuzzing stuff is also going to be in core when it becomes available. So the coverage guided fuzz engines are going to be in core. So what we're really trying to do is build a path for people to understand their security posture, as Taylor said, using what's available today in open source, making that approachable, but show them the value to upgrade Ultimate, as Taylor and Sam hit on. Like, we've taken time to build out custom workflows, interpretation of results, duplication of results. Nobody that's working on DAST days on the call, but DAST is a great example of like, you're going to have with 100 findings that are really the one finding. And if you were just using the open source tool, you would know that, but we're building in that intelligence to be able to deduplicate that stuff for you, as well as add other value like some of the acquisitions we've had and so forth that will live in Ultimate only. So I definitely think, Mo, like it sounds like we paid you before this call to bring up all the good things we're doing. So whoever owes you the $5 for that, make sure you get it after the call. But it's like, we're doing everything that you want. or you're asking about, it's just everything takes time. And I think you're fully aware of that since I think you're like month 6 of working on air gap stuff. So, you know.
And kind of a quick add-on to that, one of the fuzzing companies is very well known for their community edition. So that sort of was already out and about and is continuing to be out and about. But they always had an enterprise edition before, and that kind of division will continue, but it'll be ultimate core the terminology will change, the idea stays the same. And we are at our 5-minute warning, so everyone, I think, shoo, and then Mo, we can discuss the last question later if you want.
I'm sorry, I took over the conversation.
Thanks, everyone.